Just 40 meters from the shore, there is a commotion in the water. Onlooker Mark Hickey thinks he sees a sea turtle struggling in some seaweed with the dorsal fin of a shark circling it. He stops walking along the beach to watch the spectacle. When he realizes that it isn't a sea turtle fighting for its life, it's a person. Hit that like button and subscribe right now. This is the terrifying shark attack on Paul Wilcox. Welcome to Final Affliction. Byron Bay is a seaside paradise. Cafes, restaurants, and bars line the golden sandy beach. It draws visitors from far and wide, and it's a popular destination for backpackers with its beach-going lifestyle and relaxed atmosphere. A lighthouse lies at the far end of the bay, indicating mainland Australia's most easterly point. Everything in Byron centers around the beach and the swimming, snorkeling, and surfing on offer. But the waters around Australia are some of the most dangerous in the world. Sharks frequent the shallows and biodiverse reefs, drawn by the ocean currents and abundant fish. Although attacks do happen, they are considered rare. Byron Bay is a tourist hotspot and is visited by more than 2 million people each and every year. Many take to the water, enjoying the excellent surf and warm seas. Considering the number of people in the bay, attacks are few and far between. Before 2014, the last fatal attack at Byron Bay occurred in 1993. But in 2014, tragedy was about to strike the close-knit community once more. British expat Paul Wilcox grew up in Warwickshire in England, but had moved to Australia 10 years previously. He had married his wife, Victoria, and set up his own business in 2000. The lifestyle in Byron Bay suited him, and he fully immersed himself into the easygoing way of life. He joined the Byron Bay Swimming Club and went for a swim before work every morning. Despite being at the other end of the world from his parents, who now lived in North Wales in the UK, he still remained in close contact with them. They spoke on the phone every week. In fact, on Monday, September 8, 2014, Paul had what would be his last phone call with his parents. They joked about sharks in the area. Paul told his mother that he knew they were out there, but in the 10 years he had been swimming in the seas, he had never seen one. He reassured her that there had only been 3 attacks in the past 12 years. He was quite safe. They ended the call with Paul telling his mother that he needed a mum hug and her telling him to stay safe because he was so precious to her. That was the last time she heard her son's voice. The very next morning, on September 9th, Paul went for his morning swim as usual. He and his wife, Victoria, walked down to the beach. Both of them enjoyed keeping fit and would often swim together. This morning, however, Victoria decided to go for a jog along the beach instead, whilst Paul went for a dip. They said goodbye to each other and agreed to meet at the same spot a short time later. Victoria turned her back and ran off along the sand, whilst Paul stepped into the surf. The couple had been married for 24 years. They were living their best lives on Australia's east coast. Friends of theirs were arriving later that morning, and they had arranged to meet them for coffee after the morning swim. Sadly, that would never happen. The water was refreshing. There were other swimmers and surfers in the area. People walked along the beach, enjoying the morning sunshine. But what Paul didn't know was that there was a 7-foot great white shark swimming parallel to the shore. Always on the hunt for a meal, great whites are responsible for the most attacks on humans, along with tiger and bull sharks. Their size and ferocious bite makes them a deadly predator. As Paul swam a little way from the beach and then turned and began to swim along its length, the shark headed closer to shore. Above it, it could see the silhouetted outlines of surfers and swimmers on the surface of the water. Paul was in its line of sight, perfectly lined up for its rapid approach. It could be seen from above, a menacing dark shadow that glided effortlessly through the water, but nobody spotted it until it was too late. All of a sudden, Paul felt a sharp tug on his right leg. At first, it felt like something had run into him, Perhaps a surfer had come too close and knocked him with their surfboard. When Paul looked around, he saw the terrifying image of the great white shark with its powerful jaws clamped around his leg. He cried out and instinctively kicked away from it, but it wouldn't let go. He tried to kick its head with his other leg, aiming for its sensitive snout and eyes, but it held him fast. The shark's serrated teeth tore through skin and muscle and severed crucial blood vessels. Paul tried to keep his head above the water as the shark dragged him downwards. In the commotion, he managed to free his leg, but he was so badly wounded he was struggling to make it back to the shore. Blood poured from the open gash in his leg. The water around him turned a dark shade of red, a cloud engulfing him. He was losing blood fast, but the shark hadn't finished with him yet. It was coming back for more. It knew that its prey was mortally wounded and began circling Paul, biding its time, waiting for the opportune moment. On the beach, 52-year-old Mark Hickey, a Newcastle lawyer who was on holiday, was walking along the sand. He saw a commotion in the water. The dark red about 40 meters from shore looked like a tangle of seaweed waving with the motion of the sea. The object bobbing on the surface in its center looked like a sea turtle. Then he saw the terrifying triangular shape of a shark's dorsal fin circling the object. Mark raised his hand to his forehead and shielded his eyes against the glare of the sun. That's when his heart leapt. He realized that it wasn't a sea turtle. It was a person, barely afloat in the water, with a 7-foot great white shark circling him. He watched in horror as the shark swam back for Paul and tugged at his body again, pulling him underwater momentarily. When Paul's body bobbed back up to the surface, Mark jumped into action. Without hesitation or concern for his own safety, he leaped into the water. He rushed towards Paul and grabbed him by the arm. Paul was unresponsive. His eyes were closed. He had lost consciousness, and now Mark was in danger, surrounded by the pool of dark blood and holding onto the severely injured Paul. He was a prime target for the shark. Nervously, he looked around, half expecting to see the large head of the great white shark emerge beside him. Mark kicked furiously in the water, pulling Paul along with him. He screamed at beachgoers to call an ambulance as he powered through the chest-high surf. He made it to the beach moments later and dragged Paul up onto the sand. He immediately started CPR. A crowd gathered around the two of them. For 20 minutes, Mark continued CPR until emergency crews arrived. Unaware of the trouble Paul was in, Victoria had turned around at the end of the beach and began running back to her starting spot. That's when she saw a large crowd gathered on the sand. She could see a figure lying still, and her heart leapt when she realized that it could be Paul. She ran as fast as she could and pushed past the onlookers. Her worst fears were realized when she saw Paul lying on the beach and surrounded by blood-stained sand. Paramedics arrived moments later, but tragically, Paul was pronounced dead at the scene. Immediately, the beach was closed. Everybody was shocked by the death of Paul. He was well-liked amongst those in Byron Bay, and to lose one of their own was a huge tragedy. Lifeguards were called to help search for the shark at Byron Bay. It was easily spotted, still swimming in the water, its enormous body clearly visible just below the surface. Great white sharks are a protected species, and so it was not cold. Instead, lifeguards used jet skis and helicopters to drive the animal away from the shore. But now that it had a taste for human blood, would it be back for more? Victoria was in shock and was escorted to hospital, where it is reported that she was sedated. Her family rushed to her bedside to support her. Back in Wales, Paul's parents, Brian and Marie, learnt of the terrible news. Marie was in complete shock, having spoken to him less than 24 hours before. The only comfort Marie could take from the terrible loss was that Paul's death was incredibly quick, and that he died doing what he loved. She kept recalling the conversation she had with him only the day before, and the very last thing he said to her was, "I want a mum hug." Sadly, Paul Wilcox never would get that hug he wanted before meeting his terrifying final Affliction.